The first thing I remember is the silence, not the shouting, not the wine glass trembling on the table, not even the way every rich person in that dining room suddenly forgot how to chew, but the silence that came right after Graham Whitlock stood up and looked at me like I was something the kitchen had dragged in by mistake. It was one of those men who did not need to raise his voice to remind you he had money. But that night he raised it anyway. Maybe because money had stopped being enough for him. Maybe because some people only feel tall when they are trying to make somebody else small. And there I was, Maya Brooks, 32 years old, black, tired in places sleep could not fix, holding a silver tray in the middle of the Maribel room in downtown Chicago, trying not to let my hands shake while a billionaire in a charcoal suit said, "Loud enough for God and half the North Shore to hear. I did not come here to be served by someone like you." Now, if you have ever worked service, you already know there's a special kind of smile you learn. The kind that says everything is fine while your soul is in the back room throwing chairs. And I had worn that smile so many times it felt almost stitched onto my face. But that night, standing under those soft gold lights with the white tablecloths, the glass chandeliers, the piano player pretending he had not just hit the wrong note out of shock, I felt something inside me go very still. The Maribel room was not just some restaurant. It was the kind of place where the butter came shaped like tiny roses and the menu had words people pronounced wrong with confidence. A place where men in custom suits called the valet by the wrong name and women in pearls sent soup back because it was emotionally lukewarm, whatever that means. I had fought hard to get hired there, harder than I ever told anyone, because a job like that meant tips that could pay the electric bill before the shutoff notice turned pink. It meant my daughter Nia could keep taking violin lessons at the community center. It meant maybe, just maybe, we can move out of our apartment on 79th, where the radiator banged all night like it owed somebody money. People love to tell you hard work pays off, and I do believe that, I really do, but they never mention that. Sometimes hard work has to pay interest first, and mine had a mountain of it. I grew up on the South Side with a mother who cleaned offices after midnight and a father who drove buses until his knees gave out. And in our house, you did not complain unless something was bleeding, smoking, or actively falling off the wall. My mother used to say, "Maya, do not let this world make you bitter, because bitterness is expensive. And baby, we are already broke." And I would laugh because she always found a way to put a joke inside the truth. But I understood her. She had been followed in stores, talked down to in hospitals, ignored at counters, smiled through insults from people who thought a uniform meant permission. And somehow she still kept a softness in her that felt almost rebellious. I thought I had inherited that softness, or at least learned how to fake it, until I had Nia and found out motherhood turns your heart into both a pillow and a weapon. I was 21 when I found out I was pregnant, working at a diner off Cottage Grove, wearing sneakers with holes in the soles, and dating a man named Deshawn who could talk about dreams like he had stock in them. He told me we were going to build something, told me he loved me, told me he would always show up. And then the test turned positive, and suddenly he discovered a lifelong calling to disappear. I do not say that with hate anymore. Not exactly, because hate takes energy and single mothers do not have spare batteries. But back then, it nearly broke me. My auntie said I was too young. Some neighbors whispered like pregnancy was contagious, and one woman at church put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Bless your heart." In that tone, that means she has already buried you in her mind. But the first time I held Nia, this tiny little girl with a face all wrinkled up like she was already tired of everybody, I knew I was done asking the world for permission to survive. So I worked. I worked breakfast shifts, where old men snapped their fingers for coffee. I worked late shifts cleaning dentist offices where the floor smelled like mint and bleach. I did laundry for a lady in Hyde Park who owned 6 dogs and called me sweetheart like she was doing charity instead of paying minimum wage. And I kept going because Nia needed diapers, then shoes, then school supplies, then a violin because one afternoon she heard a boy practicing in the Park District hallway and stood there frozen like heaven had opened a side door. That was my girl, all elbows and curiosity, with 2 missing teeth and a habit of asking questions that made adults sweat. Why do some people lock their car doors when we walk by, Mama? Why did that lady touch my hair without asking? Why did my teacher say I was surprisingly articulate? I used to answer carefully because children deserve truth, but not the full weight of it all at once. I would tell her, some people are scared of what they do not understand, baby, and some people were taught wrong, but we do not let their smallness decide how big we get to be. I sounded wise when I said it, but half the time I was saying it to myself. The Maribel room came into my life through a woman named Carla, another server I knew from an old brunch spot, the kind of friend who always had lip gloss, gossip, and emergency Tylenol. She told me they were hiring, and I laughed so hard I almost dropped a tray of mimosas. "Girl, that place would not hire me to water the plants," I said. But Carla just stared at me over her coffee and said, "Maya, you know wine pairing's better than half the people who fake French accents in there. Stop disqualifying yourself before they get the chance." So I applied. Then I interviewed. Then I interviewed again. Then I did a service test with 3 managers watching me like I was defusing a bomb instead of opening a bottle of Burgundy. I studied until 2 in the morning, memorizing the difference between dry-aged and wet-aged beef, between Sancerre and Sauvignon Blanc, between the kind of smile you give a honeymoon couple and the kind you give a hedge fund guy who keeps calling you by the wrong name even though your name tag is right there. When they offered me the job, I cried in the bathroom at a Walgreens because I did not want Nia to see me fall apart before dinner. The first few weeks were not easy, but easy had never been on my menu. Some of the staff were kind, or at least professionally polite, which in fine dining is basically a hug. Victor Hale, the floor manager, was a nervous man with kind eyes and a forehead that always looked like it was trying to solve a math problem. He told me on my first day, "We run a tight room here, Maya, but you earned your spot," and I held on to those words like a receipt I might need later. The owner, Celeste Rowan, was rarely around, but her reputation floated through the restaurant like expensive perfume. She had built the Maribel room after leaving some big hospitality group that treated workers like napkins, useful until wrinkled, and everyone said she had a spine made of polished steel. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But the cold did not come from the top at first. It came sideways, in the break room, near the service station, behind smiles that were too flat to be real. There was Tessa, who had perfect blonde hair and the emotional warmth of a marble countertop, and Brooke, who laughed at everything Tessa said, even when it was not a joke. Especially when it was not a joke. Especially when it was not a joke. The first time I walked into the staff room, and their conversation died so fast you would have thought I had unplugged it, I pretended not to notice. The second time, I smiled and asked if anyone had tried the new pear tart, and Brooke said, "Oh, we were just talking about training standards." Then looked at Tessa like they were sharing a secret with subtitles. A week later, I heard them by the linen closet, not whispering because people like that rarely believe the walls have ears when the ears belong to someone they do not respect. "I just think it is strange," Tessa said, "how suddenly we are expanding the look of the staff." Brooke made a soft little sound, like agreement dressed up as innocence, and said, "It is the times. I guess everybody needs a diversity story." I stood there with a stack of folded napkins in my arms, feeling each word land in a quiet place I'd spent years trying to protect. The old Maya might have stepped out and said something sharp, because trust me, I had sharp in me. I had whole drawers full of it. But the Maya who had rent due and a daughter with a recital coming up swallowed it down and kept walking. That became my routine. Swallow, serve, repeat. I arrived 2 hours early, not because anybody asked, but because I refused to give them a mistake to hang around my neck. I polished glassware until I could see my tired face in every curve. I lined up forks like they were soldiers going into battle. I learned which regulars wanted sparkling water without ice, which wanted to be called doctor even when they were retired, which ones tipped well only if you laughed at stories that had no beginning, middle, or mercy. And slowly, very slowly, some guests started asking for me. Mr. Alvarez from table 12 said I remembered his wife liked the corner seat because of her hip. Mrs. Kim said I made her anniversary dinner feel peaceful after a terrible week. And a retired judge named Evelyn Porter once told Victor, "That young woman has grace under pressure," and I nearly walked into the freezer just to cry in private. Still, for every kind word, there was another little cut. A man once asked if I was sure I understood the wine list. A woman handed me her coat before I could introduce myself, assuming I was coat check. One guest told me I spoke beautifully and then looked confused when I said thank you instead of performing gratitude. But the Kesslers were the first ones who made me feel like the room itself had turned against me. They came in on a rainy Thursday, dressed like old money trying to look casual, which meant his sweater probably cost more than my couch and her handbag had its own posture. Victor assigned them to me with an apologetic look, and that alone told me everything. Mrs. Kessler watched me approach as if I were a stain spreading across the carpet. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Maya, and I will be taking care of you tonight." She blinked slowly, then looked past me toward Victor. "Are you new?" she asked. Oh, my name tag and my full body were both right in front of her. "I've been here several months, ma'am," I said. She gave a thin smile. "How nice. We usually prefer someone more familiar with the standards here." Her husband did not speak, just studied the menu like it might rescue him. I told myself to breathe, because in restaurants you learn that some people are not asking questions, they are setting traps. All night she found reasons to test me. The wine was too warm, then too cold. The salad was too dressed, then not balanced. The steak was excellent till I checked back, then suddenly it was under-seasoned. At dessert, I placed a dark chocolate torte in front of her, and she shifted her water glass with 2 fingers, just enough that it tipped over and spilled across the tablecloth onto the carpet. "Oh dear," she said. "Calm as Sunday morning. I suppose cleaning is more your comfort zone anyway." There are moments when humiliation does not feel hot. It feels cold, like someone opened a window inside your chest. I knelt with a towel while she watched me, and I wanted to stand up, wanted to say something that would burn the varnish off that table, but then my phone buzzed in my apron, one little vibration, and I knew it was Nia reminding me to bring home poster board for her science project. So I cleaned the spill, replaced the napkins, smiled until my cheeks hurt, and finished the shift. That night, on the train home, I stared at my reflection in the dark window and wondered how much dignity a person could swallow before it started poisoning them. Nia was asleep when I got home, curled sideways with one foot sticking out from under the blanket, her violin case open beside the bed like she had been practicing, until sleep tackled her. I stood in the doorway longer than I meant to, watching her breathe, and I made myself a promise I had made before, but never with that much fear behind it. I would not let this world teach my daughter to shrink. I just did not know yet that the lesson would come sooner than I was ready for. The night Graham Whitlock walked into the Maribel room, Chicago had that hard winter shine. The streets wet from melting snow, the kind of cold that makes everybody walk like they are mad at the sidewalk. Inside, the restaurant was glowing, all amber light and polished wood, the smell of seared butter and rosemary drifting from the kitchen. We were booked solid because some charity board had rented half the room and the rest was packed with regulars who liked to pretend they were inconvenienced by popularity. Victor was pacing near the host stand, touching his tie every few seconds, which was his personal smoke alarm. I had just finished setting table 7 when he came toward me with his face pulled tight. "Maya," he said quietly, "Graham Whitlock made a last-minute reservation." I looked up. The name hit me before the meaning did. Everybody in Chicago knew Graham Whitlock. Real estate king, hotel owner, private equity shark, depending on which newspaper you read and who he had sued that week. He had towers with his name on them, donated loudly to museums, smiled in photos with mayors, and every few months managed to say something in an interview that sounded less like an opinion and more like a gated community learned to speak. I had seen clips of him dismissing diversity programs as charity for the unprepared. And once, when asked about black-owned businesses being pushed out of a neighborhood his company had redeveloped, he said progress always makes some people uncomfortable, which is a clean way to say he did not care who got crushed as long as the pavement looked new. "Please tell me I am not on that table," I said before I could stop myself. Victor shook his head fast. "No, Anthony has it. You just keep your section smooth. We do not need drama tonight." I almost laughed because drama in restaurants is like steam in a kitchen. It is always there. You just hope the guests do not see it. Then the front doors opened. Graham Whitlock entered, like he expected the room to stand. Tall, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark overcoat that probably had its own insurance policy. Behind him came a younger man with nervous eyes, maybe an assistant or business partner, and 2 security men who looked like they had been carved out of expensive gym memberships. The dining room changed temperature. Conversation softened. A woman at table 4 whispered his name. Tessa straightened like royalty had arrived. Victor moved forward with that careful hospitality voice managers use when the guest is powerful enough to ruin a week. Mr. moved forward with that careful hospitality voice managers use when the guest is powerful enough to ruin a week. "Whitlock, welcome. We are honored to have you with us." Graham barely nodded. His eyes swept the room, not admiring it, inspecting it like everything and everyone inside had already failed some private test. Then his gaze passed over me. It did not stop long, but long enough. I felt it like a thumb pressing into a bruise. Anthony took the table, thank God, and I went back to work. But every few minutes my attention drifted to the far corner where Graham sat under the chandelier at table 9, the VIP table with the best view of the room and the easiest path to the exit, because rich people like options. Anthony was good, better than good, one of those servers who could describe a sauce so beautifully you would forget you were paying $40 for mushrooms. But even he looked tense. He checked the wine twice, adjusted the charger plates, whispered something to the kitchen expo, then headed back with a tray of champagne flutes balanced high on one hand. What happened next took maybe 3 seconds, but I can still see it like a scene slowed down for television. A busser came out of the kitchen carrying a tub of glassware. Someone called behind him. Anthony shifted half a step to avoid a collision, and his shoe landed on a slick patch near the service station. Maybe melted ice, maybe spilled citrus, maybe just bad luck wearing a restaurant apron. His ankle turned. The tray tilted. Champagne flew in a glittering arc through the air. Glasses shattered across the floor, and Anthony went down hard, grabbing his leg with a sound that made half the dining room wince. For one breath, nobody moved. Then the restaurant snapped alive. Victor rushed over. The busser started apologizing to everyone and no one. The kitchen door swung open, and Graham Whitlock turned in his chair with a look of irritated disbelief, as if gravity itself had committed poor service. I set down the plates in my hand and moved toward Anthony, but Victor looked up from the broken glass, and I saw the exact moment his mind did the math. Fully booked room, injured lead server, billionaire at table 9, no spare senior staff, and me standing there with my station under control. "Maya," he said, and the way he said my name made my stomach drop. "I need you to take table 9. I looked at him, then past him at Graham, whose eyes had already found me again. No one else said anything, but I felt Tessa watching from the side station, felt Brooke pause with a water pitcher in her hand, felt the whole staff holding its breath, because everyone knew what kind of man Graham Whitlock was, and everyone knew what kind of woman I was expected to be around him. Calm, grateful, invisible. Victor lowered his voice. "I would not ask if I had another option. Just get through the meal, please. There are things you say when you have power, and there are things you say when rent is due." I said, "Of course, Victor. I will take care of it." My voice sounded steadier than I felt, which honestly annoyed me because sometimes your body has the nerve to act professional while your heart is trying to climb out through your collar. I went to the staff mirror by the server station, smoothed my black vest, checked that my white shirt was still clean, tucked one loose curl behind my ear, and took one breath for myself. One for Nia, one for my mother, who would have told me to keep my chin up because crowns are invisible until somebody tries to knock them off. Then I picked up the fresh wine list and walked toward table 9. The room seemed longer than usual. Every step sounded too loud. Graham leaned back in his chair, watching me approach with that lazy confidence some men get when they have never had to wonder whether the room was built for them. His younger companion looked down at his napkin. The bodyguards did not move. I stalked at the table, smiled the smile, and said, "Good evening, Mr. Whitlock. My name is Maya Brooks, and I will be taking care of you for the rest of the evening." Graham looked me over from my shoes to my face, slow enough to make the insult deliberate. Then he gave a small laugh through his nose. "Well," he said, "I suppose we are improvising now." I kept my smile in place. "We had a small accident near the service station, sir, but I promised your evening will not be affected." He lifted one eyebrow. "That is a bold promise. I hope you understand the level of service this table requires. I have eaten in private clubs in London, tasting rooms in Tokyo, in estates in Napa where the staff know what you want before you ask for it. I am not fond of lowering standards." There it was, wrapped in velvet but sharp underneath. I could feel the room leaning in, though nobody turned their head. I said, "I understand completely, sir. The Maribel room holds every member of its service team to the same standard." His mouth twitched. "Is that so? Then this should be educational for both of us." The younger man beside him shifted uncomfortably and murmured, "Graham, come on." But Graham ignored him. I took the wine order. I described the specials. I answered his questions about the dry-aged ribeye, the halibut, the winter truffle supplement, all of it. He interrupted twice, corrected my pronunciation once even though he was wrong, and asked if I was sure the chef recommended the Syrah with the lamb, as if I had wandered in from a bus stop and guessed. Each time I stayed even. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. I would be happy to confirm, sir." But inside, the old cold feeling was spreading. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The terrible exhaustion of knowing what is happening before it fully happens. When I returned with the wine, he watched my hands as I cut the foil and eased the cork out. To his disappointment, I did not drop the bottle, set anything on fire, or forget how liquid works. I poured a tasting measure. Graham swirled, sniffed, tasted, then looked at me and said, "That is always a pleasant surprise." The word competent landed harder than an outright insult, because he meant it as generosity. I said, "Thank you, sir," though what I wanted to say was, "Congratulations on surviving a woman opening wine." The night kept tightening around us. At table 6, Mrs. Kim gave me a small, sympathetic smile when I passed. At the bar, Tessa whispered something to Brooke, covered her mouth like the gossip had perfume. I carried appetizers to Graham's table, and he inspected each plate with theatrical disappointment. When I set down his tuna crudo, he said, "Careful now. These plates cost more than some people's weekly pay." The younger man, whose name I later learned was Ellis, looked mortified. "Maya, right?" he said softly. "Thank you." I appreciated that little thank you more than he probably knew, but it did not slow Graham down. By the time the main course was fired, Graham had complained about the pacing, the angle of his spoon, the temperature of the room, the amount of eye contact in my service, which was apparently both too much and not enough, and the modern tragedy of restaurants hiring for optics. He kept his voice just low enough that Victor could pretend not to hear, and just loud enough that I could not pretend the insult was private. That is the thing about men like Graham. They know exactly how to humiliate someone while keeping one hand clean. I stepped into the kitchen for the entrees and leaned against the cool metal counter for half a second. The chef shouted for runners, pans hissed, someone yelled behind, and the whole kitchen moved with its usual controlled madness, but I could barely hear it over the pounding in my ears. I thought of Nia, asleep maybe, or pretending to be asleep so she could read under the blanket with a flashlight. I thought of her little fingers on violin strings, the way she scrunched her nose when she tried to hit a difficult note. I thought of the question she had asked me that morning while eating cereal from a chipped blue bowl. "Mama, when people are mean, do you always have to be nice back?" I had told her, nice is not the same as weak, baby. But standing in that kitchen with Graham Whitlock waiting for another chance to carve me down in front of strangers, I wondered if I even believed myself. Then the expo slid the plates toward me, perfect lamb, perfect steak, perfect little tower of vegetables that looked like it had been assembled by architects with tweezers. I picked up Graham's plate, felt the heat through the service cloth, lifted my chin, and walked back into the gold light of the dining room. He saw me coming. I saw him smile, and before I even reached the table, I knew he had been saving something, polishing it in his mind, waiting for the moment when the room was quiet enough to hear him. I carried that plate across the dining room like it weighed more than dinner. Like somehow all the rent bills and school forms and little violin recital flyers of my life had been stacked under that lamb and balanced on my wrist. And when I reached table 9, Graham Whitlock looked up with the kind of smile that told me he had never once regretted being cruel. Not because he was brave, but because nobody had ever made cruelty cost him anything. I placed the plate in front of him first, because that is what service teaches you. Serve the power in the room before the kindness, and I said, "Here you are, Mr. Whitlock, rosemary lamb with black garlic juice, prepared medium rare as requested." He did not look at the lamb. He looked at me. Then he leaned back, lifted his voice just enough for the nearby tables to hear, and said, "You know, Maya, I have been thinking about something, and I hope you will not take this personally, although people usually do when they know it is true." The table beside us went quiet. The piano softened. Even the little clink of forks against porcelain seemed to disappear. I kept my hand at my side, fingers pressed lightly against the seam of my apron, because if I let them hang loose, they might shake. Graham continued, "I understand what establishments are trying to do these days. I really do. They want to appear inclusive. They want a certain picture for the website. They want people to clap for them on the internet. But some rooms have standards for a reason, and when those standards get watered down for social fashion, well, everyone notices." He picked up his knife and turned it slowly, watching the light catch the blade. I had heard rich men talk around insults before, heard them dress contempt in vocabulary and call it candor. But this was different. This was not a slip. This was a performance. He wanted the room to understand that I was not being judged by my work, my training, my grace, or the fact that I had kept his miserable dinner from collapsing into a lawsuit. He wanted them to understand that my very presence bothered him. I said, "Mr. Whitlock, if there is anything about your meal or service that does not meet your expectations, I would be happy to correct it." My voice came out calm, and that almost made me laugh in some sad little corner of myself, because calm is what women like me are expected to be, even when someone is setting fire to our dignity. Graham gave a dry chuckle. "That is the problem," he said. "You think this is about correcting a meal. It is not. It is about knowing where people fit." His companion Ellis whispered, "Graham, enough." But Graham flicked his eyes at him like he was swatting a fly. Then he looked back at me and said the thing that finally cracked the glass inside my chest. I did not come to one of the finest dining rooms in Chicago to be served by a woman who was hired to make a statement. I came for excellence, not charity. Somewhere behind me, someone gasped. Victor froze near the service station. Tessa had stopped pretending to polish glasses. Brooke stared at the floor, and I remember thinking very clearly, almost peacefully, "Oh, this is the part where I either disappear forever or come back to myself." It is funny what you remember in moments like that. I remembered Nia at 5 years old, wearing rain boots in July because she liked the sound they made on the sidewalk. I remembered my mother rubbing lotion into her cracked hands after cleaning offices all night. I remembered Mrs. Kessler watching me wipe wine from the carpet like humiliation was part of the dessert course. I remembered all the times I had swallowed words so I could keep a job, keep a shift, keep the peace, keep everyone comfortable except myself. And then I heard my daughter asking, "Mama, when people are mean, do you always have to be nice back?" I looked at Graham Whitlock, at his silver hair and perfect cufflinks and the lamb cooling in front of him, and for the first time that night my smile left my face. Not angrily, not dramatically. It just went away because I no longer needed it to protect me. I stood straight, met his eyes, and said, "Mr. Whitlock, you can buy the best table in the room, but you still cannot afford basic decency." The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt alive. It moved through the restaurant like a current, through the crystal glasses, across the white tablecloths, over every stunned face turned in our direction. The piano player stopped completely, one hand hovering above the keys like even the music was waiting to see whether I survived. Graham stared at me. For one beautiful, terrifying second, he looked genuinely confused, like no one had ever handed his own ugliness back to him in plain English. Then his face changed. Red climbed up his neck. His jaw tightened. His hand slammed down on the table so hard the cutlery jumped and the wine in his glass shivered. "What did you just say to me?" he said low at first, which was worse than shouting. I said, "You heard me, sir. I said it clearly." A woman at table 4 covered her mouth. Ellis closed his eyes as if praying for the floor to open. Graham pushed his chair back and stood, towering over me, and there it was, the full theater of offended power. "How dare you?" he snapped, his voice rising now, filling every corner of the Maribel room. "Do you have any idea who I am?" I kept my shoulders still, though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. "Yes," I said. "You are a guest in this restaurant, and I am an employee doing my job. That does not make you more human than me." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought he might actually throw the glass in his hand, but one of the security men shifted behind him, not toward me, toward him, and I realized even they were nervous about what he might do. Graham pointed at me, finger shaking with anger. "You are finished," he said. "Do you understand me? I will make one phone call, and you will not work in a respectable restaurant in this city again. You think applause from strangers pays rent? You think a cute little line makes you untouchable? I know owners. I know investors. I know people who decide who gets invited into rooms and who gets shown the service entrance. By tomorrow morning, you will wish you had kept your mouth shut." The words hit exactly where he aimed them. Rent, work, survival, Nia, and I will not pretend I was not scared. I was terrified. My knees felt loose. My throat was tight. The image of my daughter eating cereal at her little kitchen table flashed through my mind so sharply it hurt. But fear is not always a stop sign. Sometimes it is just proof that what you are doing matters. So I said, "Quieter now, but still loud enough. I do not regret speaking up. I regret that people like you are so used to being obeyed that respect feels like an insult." That was when the room changed. Not loudly at first. It began with one chair scraping back. An older man near the window stood up, slow and careful. A black man in a brown suit with silver at his temples. I had served him before, Judge Porter's brother, I think, though I never knew his first name. He looked at Graham and said, "She did not disrespect you. You disrespected this room." Then Mrs. Kim stood too, her husband beside her. A young couple at the bar turned around fully. Someone near the back said, "He should leave." Someone else said, "That was disgusting." The sound spread, not quite a roar, more like a tide gathering strength. Graham looked around, and I saw something flicker through his expression that I had not seen before. Not remorse. Men like that do not find remorse in public. It was calculation. He had expected silence, maybe discomfort, maybe Victor pulling me aside and apologizing to him in a trembling voice, but he had not expected witnesses to become people. Victor finally moved, stepping between us with his palms open. "Mr. Prawl, Whitlock," he said, voice shaking but determined. "I think it would be best if we concluded your evening here." Graham turned on him. "Are you removing me from this restaurant?" Victor swallowed. "I am asking that we end the situation before it escalates further." Graham laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You people have lost your minds." He grabbed his overcoat from the back of the chair, though one of the security men had to help, because fury makes even rich men clumsy. Ellis stood quickly, face pale, and said to me in a voice so low only I could hear, "I am sorry." I did not answer because I did not know what to do with an apology that arrived after the damage. Graham stepped close enough that I could smell his cologne, expensive and cold, and he said, "This is not over, Maya Brooks. Remember that." Then he walked out, his shoes striking the floor like small verdicts, his men behind him, Ellis trailing last with the miserable expression of someone who had mistaken proximity to power for safety. The front doors opened. Winter air rushed in, and then they shut behind him. For a moment, nobody moved. I stood there beside table 9, the lamb untouched, the wine still trembling, my hands finally shaking now that there was nothing left to hold together. Then applause started. One person, then another, then the room filled with it. Not wild exactly, not celebratory, but warm and human and unbelievable. I hated it for half a second because I did not want to be a symbol. I wanted to clock out, go home, take off my shoes, and ask Nia about her day. But then Mrs. Kim came over and took my hand in both of hers. Her eyes were wet. "You were brave," she said. "He was wrong. You know that." "Yes," I nodded. But I was not sure I did know it yet, not in my bones. Knowing you were right does not erase the fear of what being right will cost. The older man in the brown suit touched his hat and said, "Young lady, there are moments a person keeps for the rest of their life. I believe you just gave this room one." That nearly broke me. Kindness after cruelty can hurt in a different way. Like warm water on frozen hands. Victor guided me toward the back hallway, one hand hovering near my shoulder, not quite touching, like he was afraid I might shatter. "Maya," he said, "I am so sorry. I should have stepped in sooner." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw the guilt in his face, the fear too. Victor was a good man, but goodness that waits too long can still leave someone standing alone. I wanted to say that, but all that came out was, "Is he really going to get me fired?" Victor shut his eyes for a second. "I do not know. Celeste needs to be told immediately. He has influence. He has friends on boards. I cannot even spell." Then he opened his eyes and added, "But you did not do anything wrong." I laughed once, a small broken sound. That is not always the same thing as being safe. He did not argue because he knew I was right. In the staff room, I sat on the bench under the row of lockers and stared at my shoes. My body felt like it belonged to somebody who had run miles. Outside the door, I could hear the muffled sounds of service trying to restart. Plates moving, servers murmuring, guests asking for checks, the whole machine pretending it had not just coughed up a ghost. Tessa came in first. I braced myself. She stood by her locker, arms folded, eyes on the floor. For once, she did not look polished. She looked young. After a long second, she said, "That was intense." I said nothing. She swallowed. "He was awful." Again, I said nothing, because I had learned that sometimes people want forgiveness before they have earned honesty. Brooke appeared behind her, pale and nervous, holding a water bottle like an offering. "Do you need anything?" I looked at them both, these women who had whispered about me being a diversity story, who had watched me fight for space they've been handed without noticing the weight of it. What I needed was for yesterday to have been different. What I needed was a workplace where support did not arrive only after witnesses did. But I was too tired for a sermon, so I said, "No, thank you." They left quietly. A few minutes later, Victor returned. "Celeste is on her way." My stomach dropped again. Celeste Rowan was not the kind of owner who rushed in for small problems. If she was coming to the restaurant at almost midnight, this was already bigger than me. I called Nia's babysitter, Mrs. Bell, and told her I would be late. She said, "Take your time, honey. Nia is asleep." Then paused and added, "Your voice sounds funny." "Everything all right?" I looked at my reflection in the dark locker door, eyes red, uniform still perfect, face tired but somehow unfamiliar. I said, "I do not know yet." Celeste arrived 20 minutes later through the back entrance wearing a camel coat over black trousers. Gray hair pulled into a low knot, no makeup except red lipstick. The kind of woman who looked like she had never once apologized for taking up space. She walked into the staff room with Victor behind her and closed the door. "Maya," she said, and her voice was not soft, but it was careful. "Tell me exactly what happened." So I did. I told her everything, from Anthony's fall to Graham's comments to the sentence I spoke before I could talk myself out of it. Victor added what he had seen. Then, to my surprise, the older man in the brown suit had left his contact information along with 3 other guests, saying they were willing to give statements if needed. Celeste listened without interrupting, hands folded, eyes steady. When I finished, I waited for the business version of sympathy, the kind that starts with "you were right" and ends with "unfortunately." Instead, she leaned forward and said, "Maya, I want you to hear me clearly. Your job is not in danger tonight." I blinked. She continued, "Graham Whitlock may own half the skyline, but he does not own this room, and he certainly does not own my staff." My throat tightened so fast I had to look down. Celeste turned to Victor. Tomorrow morning, full staff meeting. No one speaks to the press, no one posts about this, no one leaves Maya hanging in rumor. We handle it directly. Then she looked back at me. I cannot promise he will not retaliate. Men like Graham rarely accept public embarrassment gracefully. But I can promise you this, if he comes for you through this restaurant, he will have to come through me first. I had been holding myself together all night with threat and stubbornness, and that was the sentence that nearly undid me. I covered my mouth, not because I was embarrassed to cry, but because I did not want the sound to come out too broken. Celeste gave me a moment. Then she said, "Go home to your daughter. We will talk in the morning." The ride home felt unreal. Chicago slid past the train window in streaks of light, restaurants closing, bars laughing, people bundled against the cold, all of them living in a city that had no idea my entire life I'd have changed. Between the entrecote course, I unlocked my apartment quietly and found Nia asleep on the couch under her purple blanket. Mrs. Bell snoring softly in the armchair with the television flickering blue across the room. Nia must have woken when I came in, because she lifted her head and mumbled, "Mama, did you bring the poster board?" That did it. Not Graham, not the threats, not the applause. Poster board. I laughed and cried at the same time, which confused both of us. I sat beside her and pulled her into my arms. "I forgot, baby," I whispered. "I am sorry." She patted my shoulder like she was the grown-up. "It is okay. We can use the back of a cereal box. Children will humble you right when the world is finished trying." I tucked her into bed and stood there watching her sleep, the way I had the night after Mrs. Kessler, except this time something was different. I was scared, yes, more scared than I wanted to admit. But underneath it, there was a strange, quiet pride, a small flame I did not know what to do with. For once, I had not swallowed the poison. For once, I had handed it back. The next morning, I woke before my alarm because my phone would not stop buzzing. At first, I thought it was Victor, or Celeste, or maybe Graham's lawyers had somehow found my number before breakfast, because that is where my mind was, already preparing for disaster. But when I picked it up, the screen was flooded with messages. Carla had texted 15 times. My cousin Renee had sent a link with the words, "Maya, is this you?" There were missed calls from numbers I did not recognize, notifications from apps I barely used, and a video thumbnail frozen on my screen. It showed me standing beside table 9, Graham Whitlock, red-faced in front of me, the chandelier glowing above us like some ridiculous witness. The caption read, "Billionaire insults black server at Marable Room." Then she ends him with one sentence. My stomach turned to ice. Someone had recorded everything, and while I had been sleeping beside my daughter in our little apartment, the whole world had started watching. I watched that video 3 times before I even got out of bed, and every time it started over, I felt like I was watching a stranger wearing my face. There I was in my black vest, standing too still, Graham Whitlock towering in front of me with his mouth twisted in rage, the whole restaurant holding its breath. And then my voice came through the tiny phone speaker, calm as a Sunday porch. "Mr. Whitlock, you can buy the best table in the room, but you still cannot afford basic decency." I should have felt proud, maybe, or relieved that people could see what really happened. But mostly I felt exposed, like somebody had taken one of the worst nights of my life and hung it in a shop window with bright lights around it. Nia came into the room rubbing her eyes, hair sticking up on one side, dragging her purple blanket behind her like a tiny exhausted queen. And she said, "Mama, why is your phone yelling? I locked the screen so fast you would have thought it was on fire." "Nothing, baby," I said, "just grown-up nonsense." She squinted at me, because children can smell lies better than dogs, smell bacon. Then she climbed onto the bed and leaned against my shoulder. "Are you sad?" I looked at her little face and tried to think of an answer that was true but not too heavy. I said, "I am a little scared, but I think I did something I needed to do." She nodded like that made perfect sense, then said, "Did you get in trouble?" I almost laughed. That was the question, was it not? By 8 in the morning, the video had crossed 1 million views. By 10, reporters were outside the Marable Room. By lunch, they were outside our apartment building too. 2 camera crews and 1 man in a puffer jacket yelling, "Maya, do you have a statement?" While I stood behind my curtains holding Nia's backpack in one hand and wondering how courage could feel so much like being hunted. The internet did what the internet does, which is build a person up and tear them apart at the same time. Sometimes in the same comment thread. Half the world called me brave, graceful, iconic, the woman who humbled a billionaire, which sounded nice until I remembered I still needed to wash Nia's gym clothes and figure out dinner. The other half called me disrespectful, ungrateful, a fraud, a plant, a race hustler, a waitress who wanted fame, as if fame was something I had ordered off the menu with a side of death threats. People dug through my old photos, my old jobs, my daughter's school fundraiser page, even a picture from my cousin's barbecue where I was holding a paper plate and looking tired because it was 90 degrees and Uncle Ray had burned the chicken again. They took ordinary pieces of my life and turned them into evidence for whatever story they already wanted to believe. Celeste called before noon. "Maya, do not come in through the front tonight," she said. "I have arranged a car. There will be security. And listen to me, do not answer unknown numbers. Graham's people are already pushing a narrative." I sat at my kitchen table staring at the chipped blue bowl Nia had left in the sink. "What narrative?" Celeste paused, and in that little pause I heard a whole storm gather. "They're claiming you provoked him for attention, that you had a history of confrontations with guests, that the Maribel room staged the incident to attract publicity." I actually laughed, because the lie was so stupid and so polished at the same time. "Staged," I said. "Celeste, I forgot my daughter's poster board last night. That is how much planning I did." Her voice softened. "I know. And we are not letting them bury you under money." That afternoon, the Maribel room held the staff meeting Celeste had promised, and I walked into the back with a security guard named Malik, who looked like he had once tackled a refrigerator in one. The conference room was packed. Servers, hosts, cooks, dishwashers, bartenders, people I had worked beside for months, and people I only knew by the sound of their shoes in the hallway. For the first time when I entered, the room did not go cold. It got quiet, yes, but not the old kind of quiet, not the one with judgment hiding in it. This one felt like people making space. Celeste stood at the front, hands resting on the table, eyes clear. "What happened last night was not a misunderstanding," she said. "It was not a service issue. It was not a guest being difficult. It was a powerful man using our dining room to demean one of our employees, and I will not dress that up in polite language to protect his ego." Nobody moved. Even the cooks in the back stopped whispering. Celeste looked around the room and said, "Maya Brooks is a member of this team. Her dignity is not negotiable, and neither is yours. From this point forward, any guest who abuses staff, threatens staff, or uses racist language in this restaurant will be removed, regardless of their name, net worth, or table spend. If that cost us business, then it was business we should have lost a long time ago." I had not expected applause. I especially had not expected it from the kitchen first, but a dishwasher named Lewis started clapping with his big wet hands. Then Malik joined, then Mrs. Malik, Torres from pastry, then Victor, then the whole room. Tessa did not clap at first. I noticed because I am human and because hurt keeps receipts, but then she stood up. Her face was red. She looked at me, then at Celeste, then back at me. "I need to say something," she said. My stomach tightened. Tessa took a breath. "I have been unfair to Maya. I made assumptions about why she was hired. I said things I am ashamed of. Last night, she did what a lot of us should have done sooner. She stood up, and I am sorry I waited until it was public to see what was obvious." The room went still again. I did not know what to do with that apology either, because part of me wanted to hug her and part of me wanted to ask why my pain had needed an audience before it became real. So I just nodded. That was all I had in me. Later, in the hallway, she caught up with me and said, "I know a sorry does not fix it." I said, "No, it does not." Then, after a second, I added, "But it is a place to start." And that was true. Not everything has to become a friendship to become less poisonous. By the end of the day, the story was everywhere. Morning shows, local news, radio hosts with voices like they were arguing with traffic. People stood outside the Maribel room holding signs that said, "Decency is not for sale and we stand with Maya." Someone painted my sentence on a piece of cardboard with little hearts around it, which made me laugh so hard I nearly cried, because nothing says revolution like glitter marker from a craft store. While strangers were sending flowers to the restaurant and notes to our apartment, Graham Whitlock was doing what men like him do when shame finds them. He went looking for a weapon big enough to kill the mirror. First came the lawyer letter. Thick, expensive, accusing me of defamation, emotional distress, interference with business relationships, and a few other things that sounded like they had been invented by a thesaurus in a bad mood. Then came the calls to Celeste's investors. Then rumors started appearing online from anonymous accounts, saying I had been fired from 3 previous restaurants for attitude, which was funny because one of those restaurants had closed before I was old enough to vote. Then Graham gave a statement through his company. Not an apology, because apparently apologies are allergic to billionaires, but a statement. It said the video lacked context, that he was a passionate supporter of excellence in service, that he regretted if anyone had misinterpreted his concerns, and that he regretted if anyone had misinterpreted his concerns, and that he rejected all forms of discrimination. If you have ever seen a man step on your foot and then apologize to the shoe, it sounded like that. For 2 days, I barely slept. Security took me to and from work. Nia stayed with Mrs. Bell after school because cameras still hovered near the building. I smiled for customers who came in just to support me, then cried in the walk-in freezer because cold air is honest and does not ask follow-up questions. And then the second video appeared. I did not post it. Celeste did not post it. Victor did not even know it existed. It came from Ellis, Graham's quiet companion from Table 9, the man who had apologized to me on his way out. He released a statement through an attorney, and attached to it was a recording from the table before Anthony fell, before I was assigned to serve them. In it, Graham's voice was clear. He was laughing, low and mean, telling Ellis that the Maribel room had gotten too proud since Celeste refused his offer to buy into it, saying he would teach her what happened when a small owner forgot who controlled the neighborhood. Then he said, "If they send that black server near my table, I will make a point they cannot ignore." I remember sitting in Celeste's office when we heard it, my hand over my mouth, Victor standing behind me like he might faint, Celeste staring at the speaker with a stillness that was scarier than anger. It had not been random. That was the part that made my stomach turn. Graham had not just lost his temper because a black waitress happened to serve him. He had walked into that restaurant already angry at Celeste, already looking for pressure, already willing to use me as a match because he wanted to burn someone else's house down and call it business. Celeste leaned back in her chair and whispered, "That son of a gun." Except she did not say gun. The recording changed everything. Sponsors cut ties with Whitlock Holdings by sunset. A city council member called for an investigation into his redevelopment deals. Former employees started sharing stories. Restaurant workers from all over the country posted their own one-sentence moments, the times they wished they had spoken, the times they did, the times nobody backed them up. The hashtag shifted from my name to something bigger. Tables have witnesses, and suddenly it was not just about Graham and me anymore. It was about every person who had ever been told to smile through disrespect because a customer had money. 3 days later, Celeste announced the Open Table Fund, a legal and emergency support fund for service workers facing harassment, discrimination, or retaliation. She put in the first $1 million herself. Then a retired civil rights attorney named Marion Cole, who had seen the video and apparently decided retirement was boring, matched it through her foundation. Marion came to the restaurant on a gray afternoon wearing a navy coat and sneakers, with a face so kind I did not trust it at first. She took my hands and said, "Maya, what you did was not just brave, it was useful." I frowned. "Useful," she smiled. "Brave is what people call you when they want to admire you from a distance. Useful means your courage can build something for the next person." That stayed with me. Useful. I like that more than iconic. Iconic does not help with rent. Useful. I like that more than iconic. Iconic does not help with rent. Useful might. Marion asked if I would speak at the fund's launch. I said no so fast. We laughed. "I am not a speaker," I told her. "I am a waitress." She said, "Baby, half this country needs to learn the difference between service and servitude, and you have already started the lesson." I did not have a good comeback for that. So 1 week after Graham Whitlock tried to shrink me in front of a room full of strangers, I stood on a small stage inside the Maribel room, the same chandelier above me, the same table 9 roped off behind the cameras, not because it was sacred, but because Celeste had a flair for drama. And honestly, I respected it. The room was full, workers in black aprons and chef coats, activists, regular guests, reporters, people from the neighborhood, my mother in the front row with a tissue already in her hand before I even opened my mouth, and Nia beside her in a blue dress, holding her violin case like a shield. I looked out and saw faces waiting for me to be brave again, and for a second, I wanted to run straight out the service entrance. Then Nia raised her little hand and gave me a thumbs up, crooked and serious, and I breathed. I told them I did not stand up because I was fearless. I told them I had been scared, that I was still scared, that people with money and power can make fear feel practical. I told them about my mother cleaning offices, about Nia asking whether nice meant weak, about all the little cuts that do not make headlines because they happen quietly beside coffee cups and coat checks and kitchen doors. I said what happened here was not just about one rude man and one tired waitress. It was about a habit this country has of asking certain people to absorb disrespect so everyone else can keep enjoying dinner. The room went very quiet. I looked toward table 9, where Graham had sat like he owned the air, and I said, I do not want revenge. I want a world where the next person does not need a viral video to be believed. That was when the applause came, not the surprised applause from the night of the incident, but something deeper, heavier, like people were not clapping for me as much as for a truth they had carried too long. Celeste spoke after me. Marion spoke after her. Victor announced new staff protections at the Maribel room, mandatory guest conduct policies, paid legal consultation for employees, and training that did not just teach workers how to smile through abuse, but taught managers how to stop it before someone had to bleed dignity in public. Even Tessa came up to me afterward with Brooke beside her and said they had volunteered to help run the first worker listening session. I told them I would be watching. Tessa said, "I figured." That was the first time we both laughed without pretending. And Graham, well, Graham did not disappear. Men like him rarely do, but he got quieter for a while. His company lost 2 redevelopment contracts. Ellis testified before a city ethics committee about how Whitlock Holdings pressured small businesses that refused buyouts. More recordings surfaced, more people came forward, and suddenly Graham discovered the kind of humility that arrives only after lawyers explain consequences. He issued a second apology, this one with my name in it, though it still sounded like it had been assembled in a boardroom by people afraid of adjectives. I accepted it publicly because my mother raised me with manners, but privately I did not confuse apology with transformation. A man can say sorry because he has changed, or because the spotlight got too hot. Time tells the difference. As for me, I kept working at the Maribel room for a while. People thought I would quit immediately, become a full-time advocate, tour the country, write a book, maybe get a talk show where I judged billionaires on their table manners, which, to be honest, is not the worst idea. But I stayed because I loved parts of that job. I loved the rhythm of service when it was good, the choreography of a dining room moving well, the little human moments when someone celebrating an anniversary squeezed your hand because you made the night easier. I also stayed because leaving too fast would have felt like Graham had chased me out, and I was not giving that man even a discount victory. Months later, on a spring evening, Nia had her violin recital at the community center. She played a piece that squeaked in the middle and made my mother cry like it was Carnegie Hall. Afterward, we walked home with her violin case between us, the air soft, the city noisy and alive, and Nia asked, "Mama, are you famous now?" I said, "Not famous, just temporarily overexposed." She nodded like that answered everything. Then she asked, "Are people still mad at that man?" I thought about Graham, about Celeste, about Tessa, about Ellis, about the customers who stood up and the ones who stayed seated, about the camera that helped me and also nearly swallowed my life whole. I said, some people are mad at him. Some people are mad at him. Some people are just mad that the truth made dinner uncomfortable. Nia laughed, then got serious. "But you were right. We stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change. Across the street, a bus sighed to the curb. A cyclist shouted at a cab. Someone somewhere was frying onions, and the whole city felt like it had no interest in giving simple answers. I looked down at my daughter and said, I think I was right to stand up for myself, but I also think being right is only the beginning. You still have to decide what kind of person you become after people clap. That is the part nobody warned you about." The light changed. We crossed. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was dragging my past behind me. I felt like I was carrying it carefully, honestly, as proof that I had survived it and maybe made something useful from it. Now, I know some people will say I should have stayed quiet, that a server's job is to serve, not challenge a guest powerful enough to shake the walls. Some will say Graham got what he deserved, and some will say public shame went too far. Maybe you already know what you think. Maybe you have been the person at the table, the person in the uniform, or the person watching from across the room, trying to decide whether to speak up. So I want to ask you this, and I really want you to answer honestly in the comments. When someone with money and influence humiliates an ordinary worker in public, where is the line between professionalism and self-betrayal? Should Maya have stayed quiet to protect her job, or did that one sentence finally make the room tell the truth? And if you had been sitting in the Maribel room that night, would you have stood up, spoken out, recorded it, or looked down at your plate and waited for the discomfort to pass? Tell me what you think. Share this story with someone who has ever had to smile through disrespect. And if you believe decency should never depend on someone's bank account, make sure you subscribe, because stories like this are not just about drama, they are about who we become when the whole room is watching.